Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin Jones, and I will be your presenter today. I'm responsible for new employee training as well as demonstrating hard dollars project cost management software to many large international companies. And today's CEU webinar is on estimating, so let's get started. A little bit for you about Hard Dollar. Hard Dollar is the industry leader in project cost management, and we shine in three main areas. We do very detailed cost model estimating. Second, we do measuring of your project's performance on the project control side, forecasts of where you'll end up on your project. We also have key integration points with these other areas in design, scheduling, and also connect your ERP or accounting system, because there's some key information that's obviously influencing the cost of your project from those other areas together into one platform, which we call project cost management. So let's go ahead and get started with our course. We'll begin by talking about some cost estimating best practices. So if you're looking around at people who put together good cost estimates, you might be asking yourself, well, what do they do, and those estimates, what do they look like? And maybe it's good to start with a basic definition of what is cost estimating. So according to the Project Management Institute, they define cost estimating as the process of developing an approximation of the monetary resources needed to complete project activity. So let's say we're building a bridge. The first thing we would do is figure out what tasks are involved, what activities will we need to do to build this bridge. We're going to try to break it down into pieces. We're going to do the piling work to establish the bridge's foundation. We're going to do a lot of concrete work, and we're going to do some cabling and some paving. All of these individual activities combined will make up the total project. But by breaking it down into those smaller pieces, we'll be able to measure the project effectively. Then we approximate the monetary resources to each one of those tasks. For example, to put the piling work, we might ask ourselves, what kind of crew would be involved with that? We'd have certain types of labor that we'd want to be using. What equipment will we use to do the piling work? And there's a dollar amount for each one of labor, equipment, or materials. As we start to build the project, those resources, or with those resources, they're going to have rates associated with them, and it's the totaling up of the cost that builds your cost estimate. If we're looking at best practices for how we should put a cost estimate together, there's a few shoulds to be aware of. So a cost estimate should identify and consider cost alternatives for completing the project. Just 1 second, let me get that out of your way there. So a cost estimate should consider cost alternatives for completing the project. In other words, we're not going to approach the estimate in just one way and assume that's the best way. Let me give you an example of this. I was just working with a contractor that was doing some pipe utility work in a ceiling at a facility, and it was in a really confined space, and there was a lot of wiring running through it, and it turns out to meet the project specs, it looked like the tip too hot in that confined area. So they had to look for some alternatives to try and find a way to handle it. One of the alternatives they came up with was to lower the ceiling. This would give more room for the heat to dissipate. The other alternative was to use a different kind of pipe, so they could weigh both of these alternatives and come up with the best option from a cost and timing standpoint. Second, a cost estimate should be refined to reflect additional details as it becomes available to increase cost. You see this a lot in owners or engineers' estimates, where their estimates go through different phases, starting with a very conceptual phase at the beginning. For example, say we're considering building a highway and we want it to have 4 lanes and we know it'll go for about 10 miles. So we come up with a rough estimate of what it'll cost, but there are still a lot of unknowns at this point. As we continue to go through the process, we learn more detail and find out there's a housing subdivision in the way of this proposed highway. We're not going to be able to mitigate that, so we're going to need to go around that neighborhood. This will require a scope change that affects the estimated cost. So we need to keep our estimate as up-to-date as possible with as much information as possible. Cost estimates should include all the costs related to the project. But I do want to point, in addition to the direct costs and materials pertaining to the deliverable items of the project, we also have indirect costs. We want to make sure that we're including our overhead-related items. For example, the job trailer that's located on the site, the utilities for that trailer, and all of our staff. Especially, we need to be considering risk factors and try to wrap our arms around the unknowns as much as possible. We can also allot contingency costs to cover foreseen risk. So what are the characteristics of a credible cost estimate? The information here comes from a study done by the Federal Government's Accounting Office, which looks at all estimating practices for the Department of Defense and other departments in the federal government. However, these apply well to that is being put together, and there are 8 main characteristics. The first characteristic is to have a clear identification of the task. In the very beginning steps, as estimators start putting the estimate together, a disservice by giving inadequate information. The goal is much detailed information, preferably a complete bid package with detailed description, ground rules, assumption, and technical characteristics. Estimators need to know of any constraints clearly and well documented for the estimator to get started on the right foot. The second characteristic is to have broad participation in the preparation phase of the project. We want to make sure that all the stakeholders are being included. That could be government agencies, the community, project managers, estimators, and the planners. Everybody needs to give their input and together come up with a mission of the project and be detailed about the requirements of the project's parameters. We also need to have the project's requirements reviewed independently so we can verify and confirm that the plan we are starting with is complete and reliable. As the estimate starts to get put together, one common thing among all truly credible cost estimates is that they're based on availability of valid data. In other words, what resources are at the estimator's disposal to there needs to be a standardized. For example, let's say we're estimating the cost for doing the concrete work on a bridge. If we try to estimate the cost at a single task level, the foundation, when we try to understand what it'll cost, it may be too broad of a level for us to really recognize what resources will be needed. But if we break it down into subtasks, the setting up of the forms, the pouring of the concrete, etc., then we can determine the crews that will be involved with each subtask, and it's easier for us to understand how much it will cost and how productive the crew on each task can be. The work breakdown structure and some will be bear with me. The final characteristic is to make sure we have an independent third-party reviewer and make sure that any modifications or corrections that need to be made can be completed. This can establish confidence that the plan is accurate and based as much on science as possible. This can also keep us from being overly optimistic about the project. Now let's look at the challenges found in cost estimating. I'm sure many of you out there know the challenges that exist. It's not an exact science, and it's not easy to do. Cost estimates are based on facts as much as possible, but there are always subjective judgments that have to be made. We want to make sure that those judgments are sound. Let's look at some of those challenges and solutions to alleviate those challenges that we're talking about. First of all, data. Perhaps it's not normalized or it's unreliable, can be difficult to obtain, or we lack historical data. How about unrealistic assumptions, optimism, program baselines or unreasonable baselines, or even unrealistic projected savings? Lack of technology, new processes, program instability, having experienced or inexperienced analysts, or utilizing complex can be a challenge if you don't have your staff trained correctly. Then it becomes a disservice. So it's worth it to take the time up front to make sure your staff is trained properly to maximize the benefits of the new technology. So solutions, ways to mitigate some of those previous challenges. Well, first of all, having detailed documentation available is key. Creating an adequate cost reserve, have the project well defined, and definitely conducting a proper risk analysis. Also providing a stable program, securing adequate budget, and utilize available historical data. Like we talked about before, being able to have a data set of previous work can probably go the longest way in putting together a good cost estimate. Sometimes that is a challenge, though, because that historical data, how we've done it in the past, is experienced estimators are able to do great, accurate estimates where it's not necessarily written down or entered into a database. So you have this newer workforce coming up that doesn't have that information, knowledge, or experience. So there needs to be a shift made in getting that information out of people's heads and into a database so it can be used for future estimators. Also having well-trained and experienced. So far we've looked at estimating challenges and best practices and solutions to alleviate those challenges. Now let's take a look at the specific inputs necessary to put together a cost estimate. The natural starting point is the project deliverables. This would be the list of items that is, that define how the project is going to be built. These are the items that the owner agrees to pay the contractor. In hard dollars estimating software, we refer to these as pay items. From there, we're going to place those pay items into the work breakdown structure. We start to develop costs for the breakdown of items we come up with and attempt to estimate the best that we can the labor, equipment, and materials that we'll need to accomplish each task in the structure. We also want to make sure our breakdown structure includes both direct and indirect costs. From a contractor's standpoint, once we've defined our costs, we're going to mark things up and define our own profit. In HD estimating, it's called the price breakdown. There are some other inputs that will influence the project as well. For instance, the project schedule. While it's often defined separately from the estimate, the one affects the other. So if I'm scheduling a task and we determine that the task needs to be accomplished in less time, the decision needs to be made, how will we accomplish that and how much will it cost? So the schedule and estimate affect each other, and they really need to be looked at in tandem. And both departments need to work together to make sure that there's a clear understanding of the two, including constraints, cost, and time. Risk. Risk is one of the biggest factors on the project. Another important input is to include a risk register so that as you're reviewing your work breakdown structure, you're able to identify item by item what is the risk of that item. For example, is the risk low, medium, or high? You may use some risk analysis software for reviewing your estimate too. Last of all, there are environmental factors, external factors that are out there outside of your control. Everything from weather to soil conditions. There may be government restrictions that need to be considered as the estimate is put together as well. Now we're to this final section where we want to look at, we've looked at some of these things. Let's talk about cost estimating workflow. What's the actual process? If we were starting from the ground up, how would we put an estimate together? So we'll use Hard Dollar's HD estimating module for the examples that we show, but the inputs are the same regardless of what you're using. So the first thing we need to do is establish the project deliverables that we're talking about. This may vary a little bit depending on what the contract type is. If you're doing a unit price contract, there will be a list of pay items that the owner provides, with the understanding that the owner will pay the contractor based on the unit price for each of those items as the quantities are completed. For a lump sum contract, you may not even use a listing of deliverables, and that's okay, and in which case you skip this next step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up Hard Dollar, and we're going to take a look at this. So in HD estimating, the pay items are entered in a form. Let me just get right here with you on the screen. So our forms menu, and what I did is I opened the pay item and proposal. So this is the pay item and proposal form because this is where the final proposal will be done. At this point, we're just going to focus here on entering the pay items. So I have an estimating project that I'm just beginning, and I'm going to list out my deliverable items. So here, if I can get my mouse to help me out here, I'm just going to enter item number 1, and I'm going to call that addition. And pay quantity I'm leaving at 1, and we're going to use a lump sum for our mobilization. Now, the second pay item, I'm going to just add 36-inch RCP, so pipe. And for this project, oh, I'm sorry, let me go ahead and do that correctly. That's going to be item number 2 and 36-inch RCP. And for this one, I'm going to use 1,000 linear feet. Okay. Now that we have this process started, I can go in and I can add as many pay items as I want to. So this is the process I go through, whatever I'm using, to establish the deliverable item. Also, I may be able to enter these items manually or perhaps import them from a list on a spreadsheet. So let me go ahead and all right, so for example, now that we've got our pay items, you may want to organize a set of labor resources based on the level of the worker and their corresponding labor base and burden. You may have a resource item you've created called labor apprentice, another one laborer, and another one your labor foreman. And perhaps you're going to give each of them a code to easily identify them, such as LL1, L3. You then go on to classify your other labor by trade, such as carpenter, iron worker. You could also similarly classify your equipment and material resources. So let's take a look at how a resource can be set up in Hard Dollar's estimating tool. Let me bring that up again. And here we're going to go to our form, our resource rate register. And as you can see here in hard dollar, there are 7 different resource categories: labor, construction equipment, rented construction equipment, installed material, installed equipment, supplies, and unique. Now I'm going to go to the labor tab, and you'll notice here I have LL1, labor apprentice, LL2, our laborer, and labor foreman. You'll also notice on each of these they have their costs. And then also we have options for secondary, time and a half, and scale 3 could be overtime or some special pay rates that you want to take a look at. So I'll let you just have a look at that for a second. So this is really where I can create and store my resource items. I can then apply these resources to activities in my work breakdown structure. And so the next step is to define that work breakdown structure. We want this to be as detailed as possible and break it down to a specific activity level so that we can apply labor, equipment, and material and have an accurate assumption for each task. Our goal is to be able to pull up any activity during a bid review and justify our assumptions by being able to point to the crew and the productivity that we've defined. In hard dollars estimating product, we refer to the work breakdown structure as the cost breakdown structure, because this is where you'll create an outline of your project costs. Typically, the outline will break down into multiple levels of hierarchy with tasks and subtasks. The lower level tasks are going to roll up to their parent items using a bottoms-up estimating approach. Each task or activity that is created in the cost breakdown structure is referred to as a cost item in HD. So each cost item in HD represents an action item of work that needs to be accomplished. For example, pouring the concrete or excavating the trench. We will then apply the resources, the labor, equipment, and materials, to these activities. One other point in regard to developing our cost breakdown is that this is the cost that you are forecasting. So you'll want to base your activities on your measurements, your taken off quantities. In HD, the quantities on all of your cost items will therefore be your taken off quantities, not the quantities from the owner. So let's take a look at how a work breakdown structure can be set up in HD. And we'll continue with our example where we already entered the 2 deliverables. So as you can see here, I'm going to go to our forms menu. I'm going to pull up the cost breakdown structure form. And as you can see here, it brings up a new form. And at the top, I have some rows. So looking right here, these are for defining my indirect costs. For example, this one here, you may want to define how much overhead costs will be for your job management, or perhaps you want to include the direct cost add-on for contingency. We're going to skip over the indirect costs for the moment and focus on the direct cost items. These cost items correspond to the deliverables we set up previously. So we set these up as pay items. Now in the cost breakdown structure, you're going to notice mobilization and that 36-inch pipe that we had. Let's say we want to break our 36-inch pipe into separate tasks because it's difficult for us to know how much it will cost when we just have it as this. So we can go ahead and break that up by inserting some subordinates here. And I'm just going to do 4 of them. And kind of just let you take a look at how that is set up in hard dollar. Now that I've created those, we're going to break that up into these 4 subordinate items. And the first task will be to we'll be And the next activity, we want to install the pipe. And you know what I didn't do is on our excavation of the trench, it's going to be in cubic yards. So I'm going to change this quantity to 1,500. And we're going to show cubic yards instead of linear feet. Then for installing the pipe, we're going to keep that at 1,000 linear feet. And then our final activity here, that's going to be to backfill the trench, which will also be in cubic yards, but there's going to be less trench to fill. So we're going to use 1,200 cubic yards here. And just like that, I'm able to break things down. Now, this 36-inch pipe item is a little more manageable for me, and this is how I like to break it down. You may prefer to outline it differently, and that's okay. You can set it up in whatever way makes sense to you. The key is to break it into manageable items that we can figure out the resources for. Once I've created my structure, I can start to define my costs on my items. There are 3 different ways that I can define those costs. The first method for defining costs is to detail the cost on the cost item. This method involves adding resources that apply to the cost item, along with productivity information or how long it will take the crew of labor and equipment to get that task done. The detailed approach is the best practice way to estimate because it has all the details to back up your assumptions. The second way to define cost is to plug those costs into an item. To plug a cost is to simply input a unit cost without figuring out the detail behind it. So instead of adding resources and production information, you can simply put in a cost per unit. This is a quick and easy way to define cost, but it lacks information that backs up what is claimed. This is obviously less accurate and not a best practice, but this method can be helpful to use as a placeholder until more information is acquired. And then the third is the cost. These can be defined cost items by receiving quotes from your subcontractors who you'll be hiring to do the work. Typically, there will be at least some, let me get rid of that, that's just hard dollar saying save this. So typically, there will be at least some work that is subcontracted out to you, and you can apply the quoted amount to these items. So let's take a look at how we can add those costs to our cost items in HC, and we'll do some examples of adding costs using the plug and detail methods. So in HD, let's say I want to plug in the cost for the mobilization item. So if I come over here to mobilization, I can go ahead and open that up. And right here, I have detailed plug or quote. So I can click on the plug. And once that's opened up, looking here at labor, let's say that I want to do 10,000 for labor. So I just type that in. And let's do 10,000 for equipment as well. Once I've entered that in, I can select the cost source as plug. And I see that I entered that as 1,000, not 10,000. There we go. And notice the costs here are showing that I now have $20,000 in costs for mobilization. Again, if anyone came back and asked how I came up with that assumption of 20,000, I don't have any more detail behind it to explain my thinking, so it's not the most accurate approach. So let's go to our other cost item. And take a look here with the detailed costing approach, the approach we really recommend using. If we were looking at the furnished materials, let's go ahead and open that up. Okay. And as we open that up, now we have an opportunity to add some resources. So looking at this, if we're looking to furnish the materials, To enter the materials, I already have set up a list of many of the materials I commonly need for my construction project. I can scroll down, and that's going to be right here. Bear with me. Moment. It's probably showing on a different screen. Just a moment. Just looking for where it's showing it. Little technical difficulties. My screen is frozen, so I'm just going to keep going with this for a moment. So for these items, I would set those up going here to my code, and that's where I could go ahead and look through my list for the RCP pipe. For other items, I can do the same thing. I can go ahead and plug those costs in, and over here, when I get to equipment and I get to labor resources, I can actually structure that out. I can put that in by how many days it's going to take. I can do how many linear feet we can do a day. So each of these areas, I can add those in and then just bring those up. Go ahead and all right. Okay. So I can do this for the labor, I can do this for the materials, and each of those will allow me to go ahead and define the costs. Then when I have all of my direct costs, then I can also go in and do my indirect costs. Let's say we have some overhead costs that we're going to define by doing a percentage. So let's see if we can jump into the let's do this. I'm just going to reopen it. While we're doing that, I'm just going to go ahead and explain if your system freezes, there's always backup. Okay, so with our cost items, what we really want to do is we want to bring those in line for the estimation. Let me go ahead and pull up the new one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the okay. So still nothing there. Okay, here we go. So now I've opened up a new case of this. We'll try that again. All right, and with these, here we go. So with the furnished materials, I've added in the 36-inch pipe. The way I did that is I just clicked on the code, which brought up a list, and then I added that into and we want to go ahead and see that defined. Okay, here we go. So notice on this list, all I did was go to labor, or excuse me, materials, scroll down to where I have the 36-inch pipe, and then I hit OK, and that's why we've got it showing up. Okay? So with that, let's say I want to now go to the quantity, and on the quantity with that, with 1,000 linear feet. Okay. All right, now let's go to another cost item. Excavating the trench. On this one, perhaps for this, one thing I might do is have all my resources grouped together as a crew, and I can do that with the assembly. So bringing that up, here I've got a pipe crew, and if I click on that, it's going to go ahead and add that, and here you'll see all of the ingredients necessary for that pipe crew to come together. Okay? So I can go to my assembly tab, grab the pipe crew, and then I want to decide how long is this going to take. Is this based on hours? Is this based on days? What am I really looking at? And so I have multiple choices to choose from on this. This one, I'm going to go ahead and use 2 days and enter that. And then you'll notice our cost is detailed out here. So I'll give you a second to take a look at that. So we base that hourly, and that's showing the breakdown. You'll notice when I changed it here, it changed it for all of the resources that have been utilized on that tab specifically. And then all of these are going to roll up. So let's go ahead and looking at our mobilization, you're going to see where it's been entered here, and these prices all, or costs, all roll up to the parents. Now, when we have indirect, let's finish this out. Let's do installing pipe. And on install pipe, we're going to use that same crew, and we're going to give them 2 days on that one. And then when we're backfilling the trench, this one, again, we're going to use the same crew. And we'll take 2 days on that. And when we do this one, notice what I've done is I put in 1,200 cubic yards because we're going to have the pipe already laid, so we're not going to be filling the trench as much as we had in the first, or as much as we had excavated. So now we have some indirect costs. Let's say we have some overhead costs that we're going to define by doing a percentage add-on of our direct costs. So I can open up the direct cost add-on. And here at the description level, I'm just going to call this job overhead. And now that I've defined that, I can just go in and put in a percentage, and I'm going to put that as a 15% add-on under rates. This is also where I can define contingency using that same method. In addition, I may want to bring up another column here where I can identify the risk level that we talked about. So I've got low on general expense, but my mobilization, I could put that that's medium so that I've been able to identify that. And these are all the factors I'll want to consider as I put together a cost estimate. All right, so once we've done that, the next step in the estimating process, we're going to want to define our profit, and we want to decide what that profit margin will be for the job. So in HD, this is called price breakdown structure. And the purpose of the PBS is to analyze and finalize your target price by adding profit. The target price is a summary of bid cost and target profit on which the proposed price can be based. It'll be the total of all your direct costs, your indirect costs, and then your target profit. So once again, let's take a look at where we define profit using the hard dollar estimating tool. And so here I'm going to go to Forms. I'm going to go to our price breakdown structure. And I'm just going to close that real quick, makes it a little easier. In HD, now that I've defined those, I can go to the price breakdown structure, add the profit. I've collapsed that down, and we'll focus on the left-hand side of the form for a minute. So let's take a look at how our price breaks down. We see a total amount when I open this. Our target price, $71,000, and it is made up of our total costs, and we haven't added profit yet. But it's really simple to add profit. I can do that as my direct or indirect, or at the top level, I can just go ahead and add 10%. So here I've added 10%, and now let's go to our pay item and proposal. And you'll notice here, so we've got our two cost items and our target pricing. So if I was doing a lump sum contract where there's just a final dollar amount, I could be done at this point. I broke everything out into cost breakdown structure. I figured out the direct and indirect costs, and I added profit to come up with a total lump sum price. So we've looked at how that has broken down. Now, if I'm doing a unit cost, or those of you that do unit cost price work, where the unit price for each of your deliverables really drives what you get paid as a contractor, I'm going to need to take this final target price and decide how am I going to spread this over my list of deliverable items. So that takes us back to this pay item and proposal, where I'm going to decide how do I want my target price to be applied to each of these pay items to finalize the proposal for the bid. I could manually come in and enter the unit pricing down here, but in HD there happens to be a tool that helps me spread the pricing automatically right here under our tools. So I can go to Tools, Auto Price. I want to balance that out, and I want to hit the target total. And so you'll notice that these numbers have changed. There's zero variance between my forecast, my target, and my current. So this is just helpful for as a starting point when you're doing your unit price bidding. Hard Dollar can show you some ways to balance that, and you'll notice that it's spread it across my two items. So you can see the basic inputs that we talked about before, establishing a list of deliverables, our pay items, creating our cost breakdown structure, defining the cost, both direct and indirect, and then adding our profit, and if necessary, spreading the profit of our overhead and our deliverable items. So let's summarize what we've talked about in the course today. First, we established some best practices for cost estimating, and we've also looked at some of the challenges that we really want to try to avoid. Finally, we looked at an example workflow of putting an estimate together utilizing the HD estimating tool. So at this point, we're going to open it up to questions, and also we'll be joined by Justin Murphy, our Hard Dollar Solutions engineer, to help us with questions. So fire away.
That's great. We do have some questions coming in, and again, we do invite you to submit your questions as you have them. Please use the question function in GoToWebinar. And our first question, were the assemblies built in-house or were they taken from a service such as RS Means? And by that, I assume the cost breakdown structure.
Good question. With the Hard Dollar product, we have a list of those that we already created and have utilized, or you're able to utilize those, but you can also pull those in through RS Means.
Very good. Any additional questions? We will take those at this time. We did have one pop up. Is there a place to store assumptions and or basis of estimate, a paragraph versus a code?
This is Justin. So on every cost item, you have up to 25 tag fields and 15 user-defined fields to classify, categorize your data, as well as every cost item has an additional notes field to allow you to input any assumptions made on that particular scope item.
Very good. Today's presentation focused very heavily on heavy civil construction. Can HDPCM also be used to create accurate estimates in oil and gas or STO or other industries?
Yes, so hard dollars primary markets are infrastructure, oil and gas, power, shutdown, turnaround, and mining.
How do you keep historical data from previous projects in hard dollar software?
The historical data, or every project in hard dollar can be put through what we call our HD benchmarking, which would house all the estimated data as well as the as-built or actual data. So on new estimates, someone could benchmark against previous estimates depending on given criteria, whether they want to benchmark against every single job for that particular company, or they want to filter it down to maybe a specific type of job or a specific state where that job is being performed.
And I believe we just did a benchmarking webinar within the last couple of months, which you can find on our website at harddollar.com. One additional question here. Can you address integration with Primavera? Does hard dollar integrate with Primavera?
Yes, hard dollar has a bidirectional integration with Oracle P6. I believe the latest version we support is 8.3. So we can bring in work breakdown structures from P6 to establish your cost breakdown structure, or we can use hard dollar, create that structure, and turn around and create a new project in P6 and resource load it and provide that skeleton skeleton structure within P6, and up to, I guess, the schedulers and planners to then put in the appropriate logic and relationships between the activities.
Very good. We have a couple of additional questions still coming in. Can you attach an external document to an estimate? If so, can it be attached to a specific line item?
Documents can be attached to hard dollar jobs. There's the attachments register. For line item attachments, we would leverage one of our user-defined fields, and typically those would be linked out to SharePoint or some external or web-based URL, whether that's internal or external to the company.
Great. Can you talk about the summary? What does it look like? Does it include a project summary that includes assumptions? Again, I'll repeat it. What does the summary look like? Does it include a project summary that can include assumptions?
Yes. So in today's webinar, we've primarily looked at the register view, so the CBS register and the pay item and proposal register. Both of those you can print out directly from those register views, whether into a PDF format or straight to Excel, kind of as what you see is what you get type of format. Alternatively, there are standard reports within hard dollar, both from the cost breakdown side as well as the pay item side, so there would be more summary, turn it into my executive or supervisor type of reports if needed.
Can you track various funding sources on a collaborative project?
Can you track various funding sources? Yeah, so again, going back to my comment on the tags and user-defined fields, every item that you add, you could say one of those 25 tags. You can change the caption on it. Say tag number 1 is now my funding source. So as you're going through your estimate, you're building out your structure, going into level 2, level 3, level 4. Those terminal items, the items that are driving the cost, man hours, quantities, etc., would be assigned to one or many different funding sources. So then you can group and filter that CBS structure based on that funding source.
Can you please address how to generate reports such as cash flow?
Cash flow, Well, we need to introduce timing in order to generate cash flow. To introduce timing, we can do it 3 ways. One, you can manually put in your start and finish dates to cost items. That might be a best approach if your estimate is relatively small. As your estimates get more and more complex, we'll probably integrate with Microsoft Project or Oracle Primavera. Those schedules, again, having that bidirectional integration, once that scheduling logic is in place within either of those applications, the timing information, the start and finish dates would come back into hard dollar, so the timing would now be associated with all of the cost items, which then will allow us to look at cash flow diagrams and resource utilization diagrams.
Very good. We have an additional question here. Someone that's new at their company, the company does not keep historical data. How would you suggest that they start compiling that historical data?
The company does not have historical data?
That's what it says. It says he's new at the company that does not keep historical data. Where do they start? How do they start?
Oh, they start with hard dollar. And I guess the key thing on historical data and how you're going to use it is how detailed you want it to be. Are you going to be essentially benchmarking or comparing based on activities, based on similar scopes of work, based on some type of code? Maybe it's a CSI code, maybe it's an account code. Whatever that company chooses, then implement a standardization on that coding structure, whether it's account codes, CSI codes, phase codes, etc., so that when you create one job and create many jobs, it has that similar structure. So there's a normalization between the data.
Very good. It looks like we've gone through the questions. If there are any outstanding questions, we'll be happy to take those. Otherwise, we do appreciate you joining us. Again, our next webinar is Wednesday, October 23rd, a CEU webinar on best practices for project controls. You can obtain more information on our website, and I'll throw it back to Justin Jones to wrap us up.
Well, again, thank you for joining us today. The next steps, we'll email with a link to the quiz will be sent following this session. If you complete